Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome, as well as to the online audience, and I welcome especially some faces that intersected with me in my journey many years ago. Right, so it's good to see that we maintain a connection, and I welcome your friends as well. So, since I'm mentioning that already, I should say maybe just as a lesson in life about the power of persistence. This class, or however we want to call this gathering, is began in 1982. So, how many years would that be? There you go, 28 years. So I'm at least 28 years old. And it began actually a cold winter night in Brooklyn, a long time ago, before internet, before emails, before word processors even. IBM was just about to release its PC at the time. I remember because I was working on a typewriter, a good old physical typewriter. Anybody old enough to remember what a typewriter is? Okay. And Jeff Levine was a young man, was a teenager then. And so I got a phone call from an individual who, a mutual friend, suggested he was looking for some spiritual inspiration from Jewish sources. So he suggested that he come see me, and I was not and I wasn't giving this class. I wasn't leading anything of the sort. At the time, actually, what I was really involved in was quite intense academic scholarship, research, and I was also had the privilege of writing the Lubavitcher Rebbe's talks, which required memorizing many hours, sometimes 5 to 7 hours of talks delivered on Shabbat or holidays, when no tape recorders are used and no notes are taken. I'm not saying it to toot my horn, I'm just sharing what I did at the time. So it was a very intense type of work on a high level, and wasn't exactly conducive necessarily to someone who didn't have the proper introductions. It was all in Hebrew and in Yiddish and so on. So I got this phone call, and I said, okay, come over. Since I was my work was, the pressure of my work was mostly at the beginning of the week, I simply didn't have even a free second. And it's a whole other discussion, memory and the power of memory and how to recreate talks delivered over all those hours. And it's a fascinating discussion as well. But that's not the point I want to make here. So I told them to come Thursday night. At the time it was Thursday night. We moved it later to Wednesday night, when technology actually saved the day. So it's all connected to things like that. And the two guys came. I remember it was the winter because I remember how they were dressed. And they met me in my office. And we just had a conversation about everything. You know, one of those conversations about life, about God, about no God, about our search, spirituality, relationships, you name it, the whole gamut. And I guess we hit it off, you can say, because the next week they asked if they can come again. So we did it again on Thursday. And there was no plan. There was no one knew where it's going to go. And this is what happened week after week. They would come Thursdays after usually Thursday nights, 8-9 o'clock, and then slowly they brought a friend along. They brought a musician. They were in the music and entertainment business. One was a promoter, another was involved in that, and they started bringing a musician friend, a musician here, and slowly one friend brought another friend. Literally, that's how it happened, and. As I said, I don't even know at what point it suddenly became an ongoing thing. Sometimes one person would come, sometimes 10 people would come, sometimes more than that. Often we sat till the wee hours of the morning. Some of the artists, as you know, don't have day jobs. So we would sit up all night and talking and arguing, and it was a very open forum. It wasn't really, I wasn't giving a talk, so to speak. I would open it up, people had different questions on their mind, different issues, and it would be very informal. I would say it was more of a conversation than it was a monologue. And at some point, I don't know how many years, but at some point it got so many people were coming, so someone suggested to move it to Manhattan. So we did that, I think, in 1990 something or other, maybe 92, 91, and the rest is history. So whether you know it or not, you're all here, sitting here, in a link in a chain that I vividly remember. At some point, I remember we even began to share names. There was no database, there was no list, there was nothing. There was no Meaningful Life Center, for that matter. I hadn't written any books yet. It was a whole different world. And it was just these, as I said, informal conversations, and really worked. And I remember, one thing I know, I was trained that when you start something good, you continue and you never stop. So even though sometimes there's always excuses to stop something on a weekly basis, I even remember once it was a Wednesday night, and it was Shavuos, it was the holiday. And I didn't tell everybody that it's the holiday. Some people didn't even know it was a holiday. And at the regular time, I think it was 8 or 8:30, the bell rings at our home. I had just come back from synagogue and we're ready to sit down at a holiday meal, a real festive meal. We're all dressed up, and a whole crew comes in like a regular class. And and they said, "Why are you so dressed up?" I said, "Listen, I should be dressing up every week for you guys, but this week I decided to dress up." And at some point I told them, "Join us." And there was a whole meal. I didn't know they were. It slipped my mind. I didn't even realize. And it ended up being, they had a great meal, and we had a great conversation, and we had a class. What better night, I guess, than Shavuos, the night of Shavuos, the holiday. So this is how it rolled. I mean, I could regale you with a lot of humor and entertainment about these evenings, but as I said, that's not the focus right now. If we were doing it that style, I probably would do that. Night stuff of people sharing their acid trips and different spiritual experiences of altered states of consciousness. Let's put it that way. Not that it was done there; they were sharing their past experiences. And it was just quite fascinating. I learned a lot through this. I would say I learned much of what, hands-on. The most powerful part of it, I would assume, is the fact that we were all from different backgrounds. And there's magic happens when you get out of your comfort zone and you don't hang around with people that you grew up with. Because then you can't rely on just old rituals or habits and cultural conventions. You have to really be real. And that's really what happened here. We were all, I wouldn't say out of our element, but we had nothing in common. We weren't doing business together. We had not grown up together. We were not necessarily from the same traditional background. I grew up in one background, others in different. And we simply had to talk about real things, real life. And it's very fascinating what kind of magic happens when you have to do that. And I can go on and on and on of different things that came out of this experience. But we're here today in tribute to that consistency. And it wasn't just me, it was others that came. It wasn't, I couldn't do it myself, obviously. But the point I want to make is you never know when you plant a seed, and if you stick to it, you keep watering it, what it's going to grow into. And at this point, I can tell you, I don't have the real numbers because I never really, as I said, from those years, I remember faces and names. I stayed in touch with almost everybody. And sometimes I meet people I haven't seen in 20 years, to be honest, who remember very vividly. It became like Wednesday night. They knew that you could always come to the class. And I would say probably 25 to 30,000 people in the 28 years came. At some point we began to get email addresses and were able to communicate. So I know that, but even beyond that, and I just find that to be really, one of these unknown stories. And I'm sure it happens other places as well. And I just say to all of you that I remember when Philip, who were coming to the classes all the way back from 1985, right? Philip is right there, who actually gives a class tomorrow night right here, all an outgrowth of it, because Philip was not feeling well and he couldn't come to my class. So I suggested, why don't you study with one of the people, the Josh? So they began studying one-on-one, and that grew into another class, which was Philip's class. And now we're competitors. But I'm trying to buy him out. Because he's a threat to the brand. I'm just kidding. Actually, he works with us, and there's a colleague of mine. Tomorrow night, Philip gives his class. Philip is a musician, brilliant songwriter, blues player. But it just, and I'm glad you're here because a lot of people may not believe my story, so we have a witness here. And Jeff is another. Jeff is probably back from 83, 82, all the way from the beginning. Wow. Okay, Jeff was a good friend of of Kenny Ladd Vance, who was a son of Kenny's Vance, who was one of the musicians that was one of the early attendees, so to speak. So this itself is a story of its own and has its own power. And as I say, don't ever underestimate. It's not. All of us have our particular indispensable role to play, and you all have your network of friends and your circle of friends and circle of contacts. And if you allow yourself to give, and you allow yourself to sometimes share a kind word, you can't imagine what can come out of it. You know, we live in a world where we're trained to be takers, and to protect ourselves, and to continuously always be on the guard, because you never know who's going to try to feed off of you. But there's some beauty, and I would say the domain of happiness lies in the world of givers, not takers. Those that give and those that are involved in giving are the happiest people on earth. But so it's a conflict. We have both voices inside of us. So I'm not suggesting put your guard down. You know, I'm sure everybody has plenty of reasons. We have all kinds of hostile forces around us. We live in a selfish world. But there are times and there are moments where there will be opportunities where you can give and you can start something. You never know, if you keep with it, what kind of effect it has. Think of every tree in the forests. It didn't begin as a tree. It all began with a little seed. And I remember traveling to Minnesota once, northern Minnesota, and someone took me on a little tour. They said, I want to show you something. Took me all the way up to northern Minnesota, the Minnesota borders with Canada. And they showed me a little trickle of water running out from like a brook, a little trickle of water. And I'm saying, I've seen brooks, I've seen trickles of water. He said, this trickle of water becomes the Mississippi River a few hundred miles south. So if you stop it right here, he says, you keep it stopped, the Mississippi River at some point will dry up. You know, obviously it would take a long time. But it was fascinating to always see that beginnings, we're usually not there at the beginnings of things. We don't see the birthing. You know, we see the results. We don't even remember our own birthing. And then suddenly there's an adult pops up. And when you see birthings are not that dramatic. They're very small, they're very gentle, and they're very, they don't have any fireworks. But without it, nothing happens. And we like to see the success story. But we never hear about the failures that led to that success, or the frustrations that led to that success. And there's an expression actually, Ezu Chacham Haraya Es Hanoiled. Who's the wise person? The person who sees the birthing. Which can mean the person who sees the results of something. They look ahead, they don't just see the immediate, they see the consequences. But it could also mean they see the birthing, they see the process. And we live in a fast food generation where we want quick results. And that patience to see how things grow from one stage to another, we see it in our children. But it's not something that's necessarily cherished and valued, because it takes too much time, and from a financial point of view, it may not be worth it to wait around. And if you could speed it up, it would be more economical, so to speak. But there are things in this world that are not about economics, and the eternal things in this world are not about money and finances. So I say this in the spirit of this, Harriet and her husband have inspired my thoughts right now, because I haven't seen you in many years. But it goes back, 15 years? So it's all this journey, and maybe one day we do a big reunion, and we'd have to have a pretty big crowd, and try to get everybody that connected everybody. It would be interesting to see what that would yield. So it's an honor to be the host and the MC and I guess one of the connectors, and that's my role here. And as such, as with this introduction, let's go over into the topic that I was going to discuss this evening, which of course is related to what I just said as well. You know, everything is connected, of course, but especially in the journey, the spiritual journey, and that is the three secrets to an eternal relationship. So we know that the issue of relationships. You've heard of the concept of relationship, right? You've heard the word before. Not just wondering. It's one of those. So it's like they say, you can't live with him, you can't live without him. You can't live with her, you can't live without her. Love and relationships has that double-edged sword, where on one hand we all need it for our own nurturing, for our own intimacy, our own experiences, and yet it remains one of the most elusive things in life. As much as it's needed, how elusive it is to find a healthy relationship, and an enduring one, and one that does not become static or stale, and that is dynamic. And obviously, on a romantic level, you talk about in the context of marriage, the context of a commitment on that level is the most intense level of a relationship. But when I say relationships, it's also really is about friends and even parents and children. But the focus, of course, the ultimate epitome of relationship is the romantic one. So the question that remains the biggest topic of best-selling books throughout the ages, more poems, more songs, more novels, more books have been written about relationships than any other topic. Love inspires people. It also hurts people. So it's however you twist it, something comes out of it. I think it was Socrates that said to his students, and they asked him whether they should get married. He says, definitely, if it's a good marriage, you learn about love, and if it's a bad marriage, you'll become a philosopher. So, no matter what, relationships definitely elicit all kinds of feelings inside of each of us, hopefully for the best. But like anything beautiful and everything vulnerable has both sides to it. It can be it can be extremely gratifying and empowering, but it could also be debilitating and very hurtful. As soon as you become vulnerable in a relationship and you let down your guard and you're open to trusting another person, trust can be hurt. You can be betrayed. If you don't let it down, you won't have a relationship, but you also won't be hurt. So some of us have to choose between the two. Unfortunately, many people cut off. Once they've been hurt enough, don't want to pursue relationships, or if they do it with many, many layers of armor protecting themselves, which of course is self-defeating to the whole idea. So I want to address this topic pretty much head on because, as I say always in one of my introductions to this, I don't call it class, this get-together, as I said it back in 1982, one central theme that always wrote through all the classes was the relevance, the personal, psychological, emotional, spiritual relevance of Torah ideas. That, yes, I come from a background where I went to yeshiva and I had an intense Jewish education, but the thing that's lacking, whether it is someone who grew up in a very strong traditional Jewish home or those that grew up in very secular homes or in between, is that keyword relevance. Even people who are devout and pious and can tell you the Bible back and forth and they know every commentary, doesn't necessarily mean they know how it's relevant to their lives. You know, they may know how to keep Shabbos or eat kosher based on the Torah's laws, but how does it address a psychological dilemma that we have? I'd like you to find me how many people can tell you, if you have a real personal struggle, you can open up a Torah or open up a commentary and find an answer. For that we go to therapy, first we go to denial, it's also a form of therapy. Then we go to therapy if necessary, or we read certain books. But very few of us will go into and enter into the world of the Torah, because even if you could read the Hebrew, which is also the minority, to understand its personal relevance is a whole different challenge. So I find that is the single most important ingredient, not only from a Torah perspective and a Jewish perspective, because how can we expect that our children or anyone will want to embrace something if they don't ultimately find relevance there? Yes, Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur type of experience out of guilt, out of responsibility, out of whatever, superstition. We all have our so-called religious moments. But when it's not relevant, it's not something that can actually endure, cannot last. But more importantly is because in a way it's like the best kept secret. Because of the Torah that's here with us almost over 3,300 years. And it has been the blueprint and the philosophical basis of Jewish life from the beginning of time. And the Jews are still here today. You'd like to wonder why, what is it in this book that kept them here? You know, in business they like to talk about loyalty, brand loyalty. So you'll have advertisements like, we're in the furniture business since 1886 or something, or brewing beer for 80 years, one of these type of things. Because people respond to a family type of business, that this is a family, it's time tested, and you can trust us. Even though most of these businesses, of course, have changed hands many times over, but the idea of it. So we as Jews can say, and I'm saying this, maybe it is pulling rank, whatever you want to call it, but I could say proudly, we're in this business for over 3,300 years. If you count from Abraham, almost 4,000 years. And if someone wants a success story, even though Jews have plenty of our challenges, but we're still here, we're standing. Despite the Holocaust, and despite the pogroms, and despite all the expulsions and the murders and the genocides, throughout history. And we're talking about serious ones. So what is it? What is that secret? And there are many books and theories that have been posited about this. But let's remember that that when Abraham began his journey, as we read about these week's chapters, he embraced a system. He was a pioneer. He was a revolutionary. He was a pioneer that defied he was a nonconformist, and had a universal vision which he shared, and there was a substance to it. What is it that he taught? I always wonder whether if Abraham was here today, would he recognize us? Would he recognize our synagogues? Would he be comfortable to walk into the synagogues that we go to? I wonder very heavily about that, because in a strange way, Abraham was a true revolutionary, a pioneer, nonconformist. Religion today is a bureaucracy. It is a conformity. It's everything antithetical. How that happened is another story. But for Abraham stood up to a pagan world and had to defy his own community, his own family, and had to start and trailblaze a whole new path. At what point, I guess maybe this is how the rule of history, that the revolutionaries of the past, their grandchildren become the establishment and bureaucracy of the future. But when you talk about Judaism at its core, it is essentially a revolutionary approach. And it's not just Abraham. You read stories about Mordechai, about Moses. These were people who did not conform, and they were punished for it, would not bow to anything that's man-made. So there are universal truths in the Torah that have changed the world that unfortunately most Jews are simply unaware of. I'm giving you just a simple example, which some of you may be or may not be aware of. You can check it out in a book called On Two Wings. Here we have this country called the United States. Okay? The founders of this country were not Jews. They were Christians, deists, but they came from Protestant background and so on. Yet, this book On Two Wings and other books demonstrate in documentation that they built the main philosophical principles of this country on Torah. He even has this is written by Michael Novak, a Christian scholar. He wrote this book On Two Wings, quoting. It's mostly really excerpts of letters from John Adams and Jefferson and Madison and Paine and the founding fathers, and he calls it the basis of American democracy in Jewish metaphysics, and he specifically uses the word Torah. And if you go there, you'll be fascinated with how they glean from biblical ideas the first time a system, the first institutionalized system respecting human rights, which is American democracy. Again, America has as many of its flaws and faults, but we're talking about the fundamentals that made this country possible was the basic human rights, freedom of expression, freedom of speech, but it's all based on one line in the Declaration of Independence, which everyone is familiar with. I mean, there it states all men are created equal. In truth, from a Torah perspective, it would have said all people are created equal. Men as in human beings, as opposed to men that may be considered not women. So all human beings are created equal, and as a result have inalienable rights endowed to us by the Creator. These are words from the Declaration of Independence. The same people who created separation of church and state, mind you, have no problem using the word created more than once. They could have easily said all people are born equal, or people are equal. They used the word created. And again, I'm not here into a constitutional discussion on the matter, because they didn't see it as a contradiction to separation of church and state. They realized, which is the fundamental principle of the Torah and the Bible, just to give you one example of what Abraham embraced, they understood that there's a truth to the Bible that is not religious. It's a universal truth that is the foundation of all coexistence, which is that if you think that I'm not equal to you, that's the root of all discrimination. And that was the problem throughout history of the monarchs or the church or anyone else that felt they had a control, they were more equal than others. And they were the first to institutionalize it. You ask, where's the source of it? Open up a Bible, the first few verses of the Bible. When you talk about the description of a human being in Genesis, the description goes like this. It doesn't say a human being is an intelligent creature, an emotional creature, an innovative one, a man and woman who can make money. It describes the human being in one expression, created in the divine image. Created in the divine image. Now, however you understand that cryptic statement, but one thing is clear. There's something divine about every individual in this world. So one step from that is that every one of us, by right of our birth, not by who you're born to, what family, what religion or no religion, has inalienable rights that can never be compromised by anybody, because nobody created you, and we're all equal in that sense. It was until the founding fathers of the United States that no one had created a system, a secular government built on that principle. Jews always lived by that principle. The whole entire Torah is built on that principle. There's no room for any type of discrimination. Now you may say, well, why then the Jews are racist, and what about Jews and non-Jews and the chosen people? Trust me, there's big distortions about it. I can tell you right now, it's completely misunderstood, because it cannot contradict the foundation of the Genesis and the Bible that says that all people are created in the divine image. That means all human beings, including non-Jews. But again, this is another discussion. I just want to point out how if you really cut through a lot of the stereotypes that many of us have been infected by as well, you come to universal principles that are absolutely revolutionary and have changed and shaped this world. How many Jews know this? Very few, because this is not taught in Hebrew school. At most, we're taught about a parochial system, about Shabbos and kosher and the laws. And I'm not saying those don't have value, but there's laws and there's the underlying principles. It all comes down to one thing: having a relationship with, as I said, expressing your divine image in this world, fulfilling your calling, discovering your mission in this world. So when it's voiced in a language that say, strips it from some of the religious context and the rituals, you'll discover unbelievable truths. And that's what Abraham pioneered. Simple as that. And that's why he changed the world. And he essentially became the father of all nations, as the Bible itself puts it. So to apply this to any area in life is critical, and I feel I took it upon myself as my mission in a way. Not that I should be the only one. I'm sure that others doing the same thing, and hopefully in good ways, to try to decipher and so-called, as I said, cut away the externals and the context to get to the core issue of what is the personal relevance of Judaism and Torah, to our life today, that deals with our psychological struggles, emotional issues, dealing with families, relationships, and so on. And when you ask that question in that context, think of what kind of the far-reaching implications of how you should be reading a chapter in the Torah. The first question you should be asking is not what the commentaries say on this verse or that verse. That's all nice. The most important thing is, who cares? Why do I need to know about this story, about Abraham and Sarah that lived for almost 4,000 years ago, or about Jews who were enslaved in Egypt and then left? Happened in a different part of the world, a different time of history. We live in a whole new world today. Why is it relevant? And I say it specifically in an irreverent way. Who cares? Why is this relevant to my life? And as they say, Shailas Chochem Chetzi Tshuva, the question of a wise person is half an answer. If you're not ready to ask this question, you'll never find the relevance. This is the single most important question that a person should ask about anything in life, the truth, but also, and especially about Judaism and Torah. And if you wonder if this is my own innovation, absolutely not. What do you think the word Torah means? Torah does not mean a Bible. That's some Latin translation. I don't even know where it comes from. The word Torah comes from a Hebrew word called Hira. It means a directive, a guide. To use an expression from the Medrash, a blueprint. It's a blueprint for life. That's the word Torah. So beyond a book of laws and a book of history and a book of teaching us about our own ancestry and so on, the Torah is a blueprint. So then there's an absolutely legitimate question to ask: where is it a blueprint? When I read a particular episode or verse or character, how is that a blueprint for my life today in the year 2000 and time flies, 2010, dealing with my struggles today? And when you ask that question, and you ask it many times, enough times, by the right people, you'll find an answer. So in that context, that's what I would like to address, is one, as you'll see, quite revolutionary concept that is as relevant today as it was 3,800 years ago. So we read in this week's chapter, I said mention about relationships. Well, before I get to the reading, let me go back to what I was saying. So relationships is an excellent example. I mean, most money spent in therapy is about relationships. Whether it's with your mother and father relationships, or it's with your spouse, or a relationship that you want to have that you don't have. Mostly about relationships. So, as I said earlier, it's a double-edged sword. Relationships are can be the source of the greatest happiness and joy in life, and can be the source of the greatest misery and destruction in life, because it touches upon the core of who we are as human beings. The fact that bestseller books continue to be written about relationships just tells you that nobody is succeeding, or else you wouldn't need new books. So there's a constant hunger, and it's unsatisfied, and especially in our day and age, there's a crisis, you can even say, in that area. I'm not going to get into the statistics of divorce or the other statistics. Bottom line is, there's a real crisis. Because even people are married, and there's no statistic to show that people who are emotionally divorced, even if they're technically married, and how many people will even admit that, it's clear that there are serious issues in the area of relationship. What it is, how does one find it? Most of us are really almost repeating the patterns of our own parents, for good or for bad, because that's our model. And if it's not our parents, we have the media to thank, and other blind leading the blind models that creates a whole environment of standards and so on. And if you wonder what, to be able to sit down objectively and say, what is a relationship? What does love mean? It's almost an impossible question to answer, because none of us are objective about it. We're all subjective. Firstly, we're subjective because we need it. So we can't just stand back and say, and be and wax eloquent about it. Secondly, all of us have experiences in this area. Good ones and not good ones. So we're hardly in a position of type of objectivity that we can just discuss it in this type of calm way. Yes, probably we can give more advice, better advice to others than we give to ourselves. I mean, this is common. You probably advise others about very brilliant advice that you never apply to yourself. You're making all the things you tell them they shouldn't do. You're probably doing it yourself. That's usually what good consultants are like. And I'm not saying that advice is bad. It's one thing is when you see it by another. It's another when you have to apply it to your own personal life. Does that resonate with anybody? You give good advice to people. Yet that is why maybe that it's critical to have a book that considers itself a blueprint, because we could study, let's say, the story of the romance between Abraham and Sarah, or Rebecca and Isaac, and look at them and see what do they have to offer us. So even though we may be subjective, but we have at least some context. And as you'll see, there is a secret in this chapter that is, I call it specifically a secret, because it's almost passed by, we almost dismiss it as if it's almost just another verse. But if you translate it, and without even pushing it, you'll see it has a tremendous, and I would say life-altering implications of how we look at relationships and what a relationship truly is. So what do we know about relationships? We know the following. We know that there's sexual attraction between the sexes. We know that human beings need companions, they need intimacy, nurturing, feeling more complete, having someone with them in their lives. So there's certain givens that we know. Beyond that, we know very little. We know very little. Why is it that way? Evolutionary science has its reasons that explain why humans have to humans mate and breed in order to survive, in order to perpetuate the species. And there are different theories posited in psychology. The Torah has its own theory as well, which I'll discuss and intersperse in our discussion here through this chapter. And I'm not here to make a case or to preach that the Torah's approach is what you have to embrace. My attitude, which I believe is always the best attitude, the best secure attitude, is you don't have to have someone else be wrong for you to be right. What you try to do is offer ideas and let people with their own wisdom and intelligence and feelings see what resonates. And when you compare different models, see what works, what doesn't work. The best proof is in the pudding. It's not about how brilliant a theory is presented. It's about whether it resonates. Does it work in your life? Can you make it work? Because there are many brilliant philosophies have been espoused throughout history that don't necessarily work in life. Karl Marx, that is not Groucho, presented a brilliant scathing attack on capitalism, and at the time attracted many, many intellectuals and people, many Jews as well, because it sounded utopian, it sounded messianic, even though Marx was so anti-religious. The only problem was it didn't work, and there are many reasons why. So many things on paper could be brilliant, but to make them work is a whole other story. One thing we can know for sure, Abraham and Sarah had a child called Isaac. And Isaac and Rebekah had two children called Jacob and Esau. And we here today, the Jewish people that is, are great-grandchildren of those individuals. So something worked. Something that Abraham and Sarah, something that Rebecca and Isaac did, that worked. It may have gotten screwed up down the line, but something worked then that allowed a seed to be planted, and despite all the odds, we're here today to talk about it. That's something interesting. Will anyone be talking about us in 3,800 years from now? What are the odds of someone talking about us? So there's something they did right. That itself should give us pause, even if we're a skeptic. And it's fine to be a skeptic. So in discussing this area of relationships, what makes a relationship? I want to begin with a question, and then I'll go over to this chapter and discuss it here. The first marriage documented is in this week's chapter, is the marriage of Rebecca and Isaac. So though we know the story of Adam and Eve, but Adam and Eve, in a sense, didn't have much choice. They were the only two people on earth, in the perspective of Genesis. They didn't need a shadchan, matchmakers. God was the matchmaker. And as I said, there was no other choice. So we really don't have a story of their courtship or their dating. They just popped into the world together. Okay. When you talk about the others, like Sarah and Abraham, there again, we begin midlife. They're already 75 years old, Abraham, when the Bible starts telling his story. He already had met Sarah. So we don't have, in the Bible at least, in the Medrash there's some stories, but we don't have much about their early courtship, so to speak. The first story that's told from the courtship, from the first time they met to marriage, is this week's chapter, Rebecca and Isaac. So the technical story is Abraham, Sarah passes away in this chapter. Abraham, at this point, realizes that it's important to find a mate for Isaac. So he sends his servant Eliezer to go back to his homeland. And he wanted someone from where he originated from, where him and Sarah originated from. So he travels back. Basically, somewhat in the map, it would be somewhere in the area of southeast Iraq, where they originated from. Or later, a little more north of that. It depends how you define exactly the region at the time. But the bottom line is that Eliezer goes, and the story at length is told how he meets Rebecca. And he's extremely impressed with her subtlety and her dignity, and then gets into negotiation with her corrupt father and brother, but convinces them to let Rebecca go with him back to Abraham. Now they knew who Abraham was because they were relatives. They had come from the same. Abraham had the same roots. They were distant cousins. So the first time then Rebecca comes back and she meets Isaac is documented in this chapter. And then how they decide to get married. So even though the Bible is very concise, but every word is full of precision, and when you analyze it, can teach us many, many different things. So what I'm going to address here's a dilemma. I remember teaching a class here in New York called in the Learning Annex. It was on relationships, and the question, and I opened the class up with this question: how many of you believe in love forever after? I asked them. Okay, one person. Let me tell you what happened. I'm not going to put you on the spot here, as you'll see in a moment why. So around 50 people were in the class, and only one woman, young woman, I should add, raised her hand. 49 did not. Around 50, maybe 48 people. And so it was a great springboard for a discussion. And we started to analyzing, why. And I remember one person saying, very simple, we live in a material world, and everything in the physical world erodes, ages, and dies. So why should love be different? It's another part of our lives. So it's beautiful and all that, but as anything in this universe is subject to the laws of nature, will deteriorate, erode, and ultimately die. And so when they started talking about why is this one woman raising her hand? So they said, well, she's young, she probably hasn't had many experiences, so she's still idealistic, suggesting basically that we all maybe begin believing that it's eternal, or could be eternal, and we'd love to find that soulmate that we can live in an eternal bond forever and ever. But then life teaches you otherwise. That was essentially what the gist of this conversation was. And it made a lot of sense. Because again, the proof is in the pudding. You look at the results. Well, it's one thing when you're the first relationship you have, But once you've been hurt and you've been disappointed, and you start seeing some of the uglier side of people, and you see how people one day are so passionately in love they can't live without each other, and 2 years later they're in court fighting the most ugly possible way. So you start wondering what exactly is going on, which one is the illusion. So this question obviously became is a critical one, because. And I would say, because obviously, if you don't believe in it, you're not going to achieve something you don't even believe in. And more importantly, is this: what options do we have? Do we begin to resign ourselves and start compromising and saying, "Look, nothing is perfect"? Should we lose our idealism? Is it better to be naive and idealistic, or maybe not? So I would submit that we have two voices inside of us. Like in anything in life, nothing is black and white. One voice is more of the cynic and is more skeptical. But there's another voice that likes to believe. We all have a believer inside of us that has hope. And you see people at times dream and aspire, even though they've seen cruelty and they've seen pain. You still want to believe that there's something more. And most healthy people retain that voice. Don't allow it to be killed just because life can be cruel. So we have this conflict. And what I want to say is it's not terrible to have. At least you know that you have the two voices. At least you're alive. But where do you go with that? How does that help us? Just because we have these two voices. So the answer to all of this lays in really understanding what is a relationship. So usually I explained it as I explained it then, and briefly, that when we think about compatibility in relationships, usually we define it in three types of compatibility. You have physical compatibility. Two people love each other, attracted to each other. That's a component. If you're not attracted to another person, you're not going to pursue a relationship with them. The second thing is emotional compatibility. You're going to be attracted to a beautiful model or attracted to a beautiful face, but there's no emotional connection. Emotional connection means it's something that resonates. You feel something for the other. They feel for you. You care for each other. And then there's intellectual compatibility, which is a broad statement. Doesn't just mean intellectual as an intellectual conversation. It means that you can have a conversation. You share ideas. You respect each other's intelligence to some extent. So these three levels of compatibility, most people would say, if I had 2 out of the 3, I'd be pretty lucky. 3 out of the 3, most will say, is almost impossible. But some are even happy with 1 out of the 3. Question is which one, but that's another story. So 3 out of the 3 sounds, that's it. What else can you expect? What other compatibility is there? Well, we'll learn in a moment from this chapter that there's a 4th level of compatibility, and it's called spiritual compatibility. And that's what I call it. What does that mean as opposed to the other 3? It means that two people who share a vision, that they want to build something that's more than the sum of the parts. You see, the first 3 levels, as important as they are, and in no way am I suggesting that they're not, they're critical. As important as they are, they all are subject to change. What I mean by that is, you can be attracted to someone physically, but a few years later, they may not look quite beautiful as they did. People age. Now it's true, both people age, but you don't see yourself all the time, or you don't like to look at yourself in that way. The same thing with emotional and intellectual. As important as it is, that also they're subject to change. As a matter of fact, some people even argue that just being around someone too long, you can't get too stimulated by them because you're accustomed to them, and you need another person to stimulate you emotionally, which logically an argument can be made for that. And the same thing intellectually. People aren't stimulated by novelty, by newness. So someone that you're with for too long may not excite you, does not have that rush. But there's no question there are changes that all these 3 levels of compatibility go through. Whereas the 4th one is driven by a whole different picture. It's driven by a vision. It's not about you or the other person. You share something that's transcendent. It's beyond the individuals. And the transcendent component does not age. It may be different ways that you experience it in life. But let's just talk about it on an individual level, not on a relationship level. It's like the mission statement of your life. So the same mission that you had when you were 30 you will have when you're 90. The only difference is you may have different type of abilities or weakened abilities, so you implement it differently. But the underlying mission remains the same. So when you're talking about a transcendent vision, a vision that two people share, what kind of home they would like to have, what kind of children, what kind of legacy, what kind of impact do they want to make in this world, that is the fourth component. And the one that's least looked at, and the least that we're least educated about, because we're not taught about it. When you think about it, you realize that's a critical element. And that is, I submit, the only secret to an eternal relationship. It's the only one that can last and endure anything, because it doesn't age. As a matter of fact, you could argue it actually gets stronger with the years, because when two people are committed to a vision, the more they're with each other in that, the stronger the bond begets as the years roll on. So, in that context, and I should just add that this does not mean that the fourth level of compatibility compromises other three. By all means, the best would be to have all four. But to think that the other three is it, no, it doesn't. It's not it. Now, people will stay together in a relationship for convenience, for children, for other things, for recognizing the known evil is better than the unknown evil. There are many reasons. Many people get older and they think, listen, what am I going to start again? You do the best with what you have, and you manage, so to speak. But when you have that fourth level, a relationship never has to go through that type of questioning, because there's a powerful force like that. Which is the reason, by the way, at a Jewish wedding you have a chuppah. What is the symbolism of a chuppah, of a canopy? It's something above both the bride and the groom, and they're equalized by it. In other words, it's not just two individuals connecting, which is critical, of course, in a relationship, but there's a force, a hovering force that has been beyond both of them. And we learn about these elements from this chapter, and one verse specifically that I'm going to address right now. So Rebecca is brought back from her home to meet Isaac, and they meet for the first time. Now it's interesting, some of the customs that go back thousands of years at a wedding come from this meeting place. When Rebecca saw Isaac, she put a veil on her face, which is the reason we have a badekin at a wedding. We'll soon discuss the significance of that. Why did she cover her face? What was she ashamed? What is it? Shame? Modesty? What's the reason? It just says that she covered her face. And then it continues. Here's the verse that I'm referring to. Vayivia Yitzchak Allah Sarah Imay. And Yitzchak introduced her brought her into the tent of his home, of his mother Sarah. She had her there at the tent where she lived. And it says, what is the significance of this meaning? So Rashi, the commentary, explains, this is from Medrash, that, I'll read it, I'll translate it. He says, he brought her into the tent. Why is it relevant here? Who cares that it was Sarah's tent? So he says, because when he brought her into the tent, he saw that she had the similar qualities that his mother Sarah had. I know that's not a virtue today, but then it was. You'll soon find out. If you had a mother like Sarah, you'd want your wife to be like that. And that's when he saw that Sarah is alive. These are the words Rashi says. That's what the verse, that Sarah was alive. That although she had died, Rebecca's virtues and qualities reignited and rebrought. And what did he see? Three things. He saw three things. That when his mother was alive, Sarah, there was a flame that burned in her home from Friday to Friday. The second thing, there was a blessing in her dough. That's the literal word, a blessing in her dough. And the third thing, there was a cloud and that enveloped, that covered, that hovered over her tent, an aura. And these three things he suddenly saw in Rebecca. Now obviously you have to say that he didn't see, didn't have to light the flame, because he'd have to wait a week to see that. So clearly he saw it was qualities. And these three expressions, even though they are physical elements, became the basis of what he understood Rebecca was carrying, and the secret to an enduring relationship. So technically speaking, every Jewish home is built on these three principles. The lighting of a Shabbos candle, which marks the beginning of a marriage, even though there are customs to light candles for girls before marriage, but it becomes more responsibility lighting a Shabbos candle. that a woman does to usher in the Shabbos. The second thing is a kosher home, which is the suggestion of the blessing in the dough. And the third thing is family purity, taras mishpacha, which is a sanctity in the sexuality of the relationship, which is hinted to in the cloud. But as you'll see, if you really analyze these three things, they have much more deeper meaning than just the technical application of it. And basically the Torah is telling us what are the qualities that are necessary, not just what to see in a woman or in a man, but more importantly, what are the qualities that make a relationship a true relationship? So let's discuss a moment with the flame, the blessing, and the cloud, the aura. What is a flame? A flame is an expression in the book of Proverbs, Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam. The flame of God is the soul of a human being. The closest, our soul is compared to a flame. The closest approximation in the physical world of the soul is a flame. Why? Because it's the only physical thing that we can see with our eyes that's visible, that defies gravity. Obviously, there's gaseous materials that defy gravity, but with our own eyes, a flame is something that at any given moment defies gravity. Now, why is that significant? Because the transcendence of the flame, the fact that it's always searching to climb upward, is the symbol of what a soul is like. Think of the soul and the body like the flame and the wick. The wick is what grounds the flame, but the flame is what lifts the whole process upward. So spiritually speaking, the idea is that when it says Sumar Menechem, a person lifts his eyes to heaven to see who created you. Look just simply on a basic level, how many billions of dollars we've spent just because we could lift our eyes to outer space and we wanted to know what's out there. No one, purely curiosity, human curiosity. Animals, as one Rebbe once said, do not look up to heaven, both physically, physiologically, but also psychologically. They live in the same habitats they lived 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago. You don't see any animal and the animal kingdom trying to develop fax machines or cell phones or new cable networks and stuff like that. They're comfortable. It's called animal bliss. It's envious at times, no question about it. They don't go down, but they also don't go up. Humans, in their own curiosity, which of course can also hurt us, are constantly seeking. We seek to improve our lives. We see the sky, you see the stars and the planets. We have to figure out a way to go there. Now, there's been many secondary benefits from the NASA program. Many of our technologies are based on, they say war is the father of invention, but so is curiosity. That many technologies, even the walking shoes, for example, and so many other things like Velcro and so on, all came out of necessity because they were trying to figure out to create different type of for the clothing and the foods and stuff like that, and packaging for the astronauts going into outer space. But that was not the reason that this country spent so much, how many tax dollars. It was only one reason, because we saw heaven and we wanted to know what's there. Simple as that. And the curiosity. And that's on a very basic level. What makes the soul unique is one word: we are transcendent creatures. So on one hand, as the Talmud says, there are three things that were compared to animals, and there are three things that were compared to angels. We eat and sleep and procreate, but we also have aspirations. We dream, and we imagine, and we look upward, and we look always to improve. That's called transcendence. So we have two voices inside of us. One voice, the voice of survival. You need to eat and sleep and pay your bills. Most of the day we're busy with that voice, with that part of our lives. But there's always another voice. It's called the transcendent voice. And we satisfy it in different ways. Some through romance, through music, through art, through religion, through spirituality, through weekends, travel. Many different ways that we try to satisfy that and relieve the pressure of a material life. Do we succeed or not is another story, but there's no question there's a search for relief. God forbid a person stops looking for such relief, there's usually deep trouble. And most problems, I would say even all problems, most of our addictions, and most of the destructive things we get involved in life is because our transcendental needs are not being met. So you search for any type of relief. When a person is passionate and is desperate, If you don't find a healthy outlet, you'll find an unhealthy outlet. What do you think? Why is the concept of addiction? You think anybody wants to be addicted to something? It's the most demoralizing thing to feel you're dependent on anything, whether it's gambling or sex or drugs or alcohol or other addictions, or religious addiction for that matter. Nobody starts out being an addict. What to start out is with a deep hunger. And a deep hunger, you don't find it in a healthy way, you suddenly find it in an unhealthy way, and you can't get out of it. Actually, and this is just tangentially, one of the key things in healing true addiction, by the way, is not just stopping, it's finding an alternative to channel that hunger. Because you can stop feeding yourself with something destructive, but the hunger is still there, so it's going to give somewhere. But that's another discussion. So to go back to this idea is that the soul is a transcendence, a flame. And what Isaac saw in Rebecca is what he saw in his mother. He saw an aspiring soul. A person who's always looking upward, is not consumed with the things that of material life and survival. Someone that knows how to dream. Someone knows how to get beyond difficulties. So there you go. There's the first thing you should be looking for. And this is, even though this is Isaac seeing it in Rebecca, obviously it goes both ways. Not just women have souls, men have souls, believe it or not, too. You know, and therefore, when you look at a human being, you can tell pretty quickly if their soul is active or not. And here's the way: do they have a transcendent voice? Are they hungry? Now you may say you see it, but it expresses itself in, as I said, in destructive ways. Fine, that's another issue. But that's what he saw. He saw flame burning, and he saw it not just one day; he saw it all week long. It wasn't just a weekend experience. It was every day. As soon as he saw that, he understood right away, and that was the quality of his mother. The person who transcends is able to look upward, because that type of attitude, as we all know, can get you through anything. Any challenge in life, if you're not consumed by the moment, and you have the ability to look upward, and believe and hope, is a quality that can get through the most difficult challenges in life. We never know what curveballs life will present to us. So you can date somebody and think you figured it all out, but you haven't. How could you figure it all? You don't know what's coming tomorrow. And what will happen, God forbid, in a moment of crisis. Nobody should have any crisis. But if a challenge comes your way, so how can you recognize today in a person what they'll be like in 10 years from now if there's a serious challenge that you've never seen them subject to? The answer is, you see personality. You see, do you have a person that you can trust? That no matter what comes your way, you know you have a partner that can work it out with you, because they're not trapped by the wick, by the body. They have a flickering soul. Another element of a flame, of course, is that it gives off warmth and it illuminates. It's not just a taker, it's a giver, which is the other thing that he saw. A person who is busy and has joy in illuminating and in giving. The opposite, of course, is someone that just wants more. I need. You may wonder, what did Rebecca see in Isaac that she agreed? That's a good question. But right now I'm working the other way around. I just thought of that question. Well, maybe she saw, if he appreciates all that in me, then he's all right. Okay? Maybe that's it. Like, the man wears the pants, but the woman tells him what pants to wear. Yeah. Is that the type of guy you're looking for? We're using you as the guinea pig here today, the kosher guinea pig. So that's number one. Number two was the blessing in the Isa. The expression is bracha, b'tsuya, b'isa. Literally means a blessing in her dough. It's an expression used, you could say a person knows how to cook well. So, there are people like that. Whatever they touch just comes out well. There are other people, whatever they touch is the other way around. I'm in the latter category. It comes to dough. But there are people like that. There are people who just, as a matter of fact, really people who have that natural instinct. Even when they don't prepare, they have to put something together quickly food-wise. It just always comes out great. It's like this type of, an artist type of thing. But as I said earlier, it also alludes to a person who leads a kosher home. But kosher, I should add, you can be kosher, you can eat kosher and not be kosher. Just like you can keep Shabbos and not be Shabbosdik. Eating kosher is one part of it, which is you eat something that is prepared the right way according to the Torah standards. But there are many people who eat kosher and are not kosher people. The Baal Shem Tov, in his inimitable way, actually once demonstrated to his students, he showed them a very scholarly rabbi who had a shtreimel, who had the whole look. And then suddenly, as they're watching him, he was eating cholent, which is this stew that you eat on Shabbos. And they were watching him. Suddenly, they see his face change. They suddenly saw a vision of an ox. He suddenly turned into an animal. And the Baal Shem Tov was showing them that you could be eating kosher, you could even be eating a Shabbos food, but it's all about, like, you're basically indulging. There's no Shabbos, there's no kosher spirit. So there's more than just the physical element of it. This is part of the problem I alluded to earlier, where Jewish ritual gets divorced from its soul, and people become obsessed with the ritual and they forget that there's a whole spirit behind it. Now, of course, besides the spirit, there's also practical. We live in a material world, so there is absolutely something about ritual, about behavior. It's not just good enough to tell someone that you love, I love you, but they never act on it. We live in a world of action. So, but it's really a fusion of spirit and action that's necessary. So Jewish ritual is filled with spiritual meaning. Unfortunately, it's easy to get trapped just in the physical crutch of it, which is the ritual. But again, it's a separate subject. So what he saw in what he saw in Rebecca, which was similar to his mother Sarah, was the second thing, was the blessing in the dough, which goes beyond just, as I said, the physical kosherness of it or the good cooking part of it. What blessing in dough? It's an interesting expression, blessing in dough. It's like you usually wouldn't put those two things together. You say a blessing, a flame is more appropriate. A blessed flame, a blessed dough. So I'll share a short story that captures it. A blessing really means sanctity. So one of the Hasidic Rebbes, when he was a little child, was walking with his father. He writes the story in his diary. And they were walking in the woods, and they were having a conversation. And suddenly, a kid, whatever, many of us do it all the time, inadvertently he pulls off rips off a leaf from the tree, from one of the bushes they were walking by. His father sees him rubbing it in his fingers, and he reprimands him. He says, "What right did you have to rip that leaf off the tree and just rub it for no particular reason? This leaf has its own life, it's its own trajectory, has its own history. You've now disrupted, in a sense, the script of what this leaf's life would have been like." And this child, as a young child, never forgot the message. How the universe is a sacred place. Now you talk about environmentalism, I know we talk about the greening of America and all that. In Judaism, Torah, there's a prohibition, it's called Bal Tashchis. It's a law in the Torah itself, not a rabbinic law in the Torah itself, about not destroying any part of the universe. There's actual prohibition. Not because we have to survive and the next generation has to survive. That's a nice reason, which also can be seen as a selfish reason for your own survival or for your children's survival. No, because the universe is a sacred place. And every part of it was put here by someone called God for a reason. And what right do you have to change the course of the history or the course of the destiny of that particular creature? And this is not just animals, it's also vegetables and minerals. So then you could ask, so if that's the case, what right do we have to eat? And not just animal, but also vegetable and mineral? And that's a very good question. It's actually a question asked in the Talmud and in the Kabbalah and so on. So again, not for right now, the answer to that. But the point of the matter is there's a sanctity in every part of the universe. And and our job is to help sanctify the universe. And that's what his father was telling him in that leaf. What Isaac saw in Rebecca, the same as he saw in his mother, was the blessing, even in her dough. Not just when she was being philosophical or doing a mitzvah or praying or giving charity was she a sacred person. Even in a seemingly material thing like a piece of dough, an object in this universe, he saw blessing. He saw sanctity. Whatever she touched was sacred. And you see it even in the beauty of a person's life. It's one thing when we're beautiful moments. But if you really want to see beauty, you have to look at those mundane moments where people are not paying attention. We have pictures, we have images, we have films of very special moments. But what about the moment when a mother is diapering a child? I'm not getting into the graphic details of it, but the gentleness, the small little things that change a person's life that are not dramatic, and no one's going to film it, no one's going to give you an award for it. He saw in Rebecca, he saw a sensitivity to the universe around her. That's what the symbolism of Isa is, dough. Dough, of course, is made from flour and water. Flour is made from grain. These are mineral objects. These are mineral vegetables of this universe, and minerals. And that's what he saw. And that was the second thing. He saw the sensitivity. Now, of course, if you're sensitive even to a leaf or to a piece of dough, you're going to be sensitive to other human beings, obviously. So it's the second dimension. And the third thing was which says, Anon Mitsuya, what's the expression? Anon kosher al oil. Literally means the cloud that was bound to the tent. That's a literal translation. But what it means is there was an enveloping cloud that surrounded her and the presence around her home. Now, obviously this doesn't mean it's a physical cloud. It was an aura. It was a vibe. It refers to what I said earlier, the sanctity of sexuality and intimacy. So the first of the three things is about her spirit, transcendent, flickering like a flame, warming and illuminating those around her. And the second one is how she affects her environment. The third is her intimacy. And here is where maybe the one that is most greatest crisis in our times. In our lives, in our world, the best way to put it is that sexuality has become divorced from intimacy. The word in the Torah for sexuality, for a sexual relationship, is interestingly the word called knowledge, to know. Adam knew Eve. That when the Bible says, Adam yada, yediya, das. As Chava, that means that they had intimate relation. Now it's not just because the Torah and Hebrew avoids using any type of literal or graphic description. Because in Judaism and in Torah and Hebrew, there is no other word for intimacy except knowing. It's an interesting thing. Why? Because what's the difference between knowing somebody and that's called loving someone? So love can be seen as a verb and it can be seen as a noun. See, knowledge is a noun. It's a state of being. It's not an act. Sexuality today, for many, has become a technique. There's a way you do it. In Judaism, love is like being underwater. It's a state of being where you're completely enveloped, that's the word, engulfed in another higher experience than yourself. If you try to take sexuality and bottle it into a selfish experience, you're ultimately destroying its soul. That doesn't mean you can't have pleasure, and it doesn't mean it cannot be it can be controlled in that way, but it's destroying its true power. The power of sexuality in Judaism Torah goes together hand in hand with intimacy. It's a body and a soul that comes together. When the pill was discovered, or in 1965 it was, contraceptive pill. So I remember reading, I read it later, I was a kid then, a little kid, so I didn't read Rolling Stone magazine. But I remember reading an interview with Bob Dylan years later when they asked him about the pill. That's an interesting answer he gave, almost what a rabbi would say. He said, women shouldn't buy into this new manipulation of having sex with men without consequences. That was the way he put it. So you could take it or leave it as you wish, and I'm not here to go into a contraceptive discussion, pro or con. I'm here to make another point altogether. The point of the matter is that from a Torah point of view, a relationship is not about sexuality, it's about intimacy. And the reason there is such profound pleasure and such profound need for sexuality in people's lives from a Torah point of view is because it's the soul seeking to connect with another soul. And to turn it into a body experience alone, as I said, it's a body and a soul together. Obviously sexuality is not just a cerebral platonic concept, but it's a soul within a body. It is the most spiritual thing a person could do in a physical form. If you want more on this, in more detail, I have a whole chapter on this in my book, Torah Meaningful Life, called Intimacy. In detail, that discusses this at length. And it's a critical point. I mean, I could elaborate a lot on this. We don't have all night. But the central theme is that in everything in life, we need to have a body and a soul. And there are consequences if you try to do something in a body-like way and eliminate the soul or compromise the soul. But nowhere are the consequences as profound as it is in the world of intimacy. If a person, for example, indulges in eating for selfish reasons, and they forget that there's, as I said before with the Isa, that there's a sanctity in the food, and you have to do it with sensitivity, yes, it's not appropriate, and they're not fulfilling the purpose, and in a way it's very selfish and wrong. But the destructive element is not as profound as when somebody has a sexual relationship and there's no intimacy. So people pride themselves today that I can have sexual relationship and no commitment. It's almost considered to be a conquest. Because it's like, I could have my cake and eat it too, so to speak, and no commitment. I don't have any responsibilities. And many people dream of that concept. Imagine being able to just satisfy all your needs and absolutely no consequences. No one's going to come bugging you for anything. No one demands anything. You just get your needs met. For some, that would be like a utopia itself. But think about it. If you go to the extreme, what that means. That means that basically your selfishness is rewarded and there are no consequences for such levels of pleasure. Commitment is not considered to be, from a Torah point of view, some type of like the price you pay to be able to have an intimate relationship. It goes hand in hand. You want to be committed to someone that you love. It would be, God forbid, similar to a parent saying, I just want to have the joy of my child, but I don't want to be committed to them. I don't have to wake up in the middle of the night if they need me or disturb my work and my other things that I need because my child is crying. I only just want to have the pleasure. What kind of relationship would that be? Commitment, and not some dirty word, it's a direct extension of something you truly believe in. And I'll give you an example. When it comes to our own selfish needs, you have no problem being committed to yourself, right? So suddenly commitment is very important when it comes to yourself. It's just with another person. So think about that. I remember hearing a while ago, a little girl, her mother was pregnant, so she says to her mother, Mommy, how do you have room inside of yourself for another life? And it just struck me that it was like such a brilliant, profound insight. I was thinking, actually what I was thinking about, and I told this to somebody I knew who needed to hear this at the time. I said, men have problems giving space to people outside of them, let alone inside of them. And here a woman carries a child for 9 months inside of her. And I mean inside means physically inside. We're not talking about there's no way to escape from this. It's part of her being, what she eats, part of her flesh and blood in the deepest possible way. So it's interesting about that. But we live in a world where we're constantly being taught, take care of yourself, and you don't need to have space for other people. And if you do need them in your life, make sure you get something in return. It's a contractual agreement. The concept of a commitment, an unconditional commitment to something, is not something that is very cherished. I mean, maybe idealistically we like the idea, but it's not something that we are accustomed to. And it comes to relationships, especially in this area of sexuality. In Judaism, as I said, it's knowing. It's two people knowing each other. Knowing, by definition, means that there's a commitment. They have to know each other. And the ultimate knowledge is obviously when it's consummated in a physical sense, as the Torah puts it, two bodies becoming one flesh. So what he saw in Rebecca, in this third thing, was he saw the intimacy in her. He saw the aura, because there is an aura around people who have that type of seamlessness, where their body and soul are one. No, and he did not, as people think, did not need to have a sexual relation with her to know that. You can know that if you have the right eyes, even without touching a person. Because it's about a profound connection you see, just like I mentioned with the flame. You see a flickering soul. You can see transcendence. A person who has that type of dimension in how their body language. And this is why Rebecca covered her face. That's where it all began. She covered her face because she was ashamed. She covered her face for the same reason that Moses covered his face later, when first time he looks at the burning bush and he sees God's presence. Not that she thought Isaac was God, but you know what happened was? She was so seamlessly connected between body and soul, when she saw someone who is going to be her soulmate, it's like you close your eyes. You close your eyes out of awe, and not awe to the person, out of awe to the experience. So when we start a wedding ceremony, before the chuppah even, the badekin is a sign that there's much more that is concealed than will ever be revealed. Respect the mystique of a human being, a woman and a man. And Rebecca just had that sense. And that carried over when Isaac saw the aura around her. Now this may be a subtle thing. You could say, how could you see it? You have the right eyes, you can see it. If you don't see it, it also tells you some message. There's that people who are sensitive see sensitive things in other people. People who are not sensitive will not see sensitivity so easily. There was these two children they were playing. They later one of them would become a Rebbe. So they were children of a great Rebbe. And your children play, like they copy what their parents do. So one of them dressed up like a Rebbe, dressed up. And the other one dressed like a chassid and came in to see him. And he says to him, the one brother says to the next, so tell me, what's a human being? What's a Jew? I don't know how the story goes. So his brother says to him, there's like 5-year-old and 4-year-old, says, a human being is fire. So the brother grabs his brother's hand and says, if a human being is fire, why is it that I don't get burned when I touch you? He said, because when fire touches fire, it doesn't get burned. Not only doesn't it get burned, when fire touches fire, they join together as one. So if you look at a flame, another quality of a flame is, as opposed to anything else in the world. I mean, water has a similar, but not as much as a flame. When you bring two flames together, there comes a point where they suddenly start drawn to each other, and then they become one. You cannot distinguish where one begins and the other ends. Which was also the symbolism of the flame that Isaac saw. And this ultimately reflects in true intimacy. You can be intimate with a person even if you don't touch them. Yes, you can. If you know the secret of intimacy. You can't be sexual with them. Because sexuality, divorced of intimacy, is a physical thing. But you can be intimate with a person. Now obviously, in the case of a sacred marriage, Isaac and Rebecca, you want the fusion of both. It's not one or the other. But intimacy is much deeper than just an act. It's a state of being. Two people who love each other don't only love each other when they're in each other's presence, they even love each other when they're thousands of miles away. And more importantly, they love each other even, God forbid, if one of them is no longer physically here. Love does not die like that. You miss the person, but love does not die, because love is not a physical emotion. It's a spiritual one. So it lives on. If it was a physical thing, the thing is gone, it's gone. That's it. Anybody misses the food that you ate like 5 days ago or something? You may miss the food, so you go eat another piece of food. But I mean, you don't mourn for it or something like that. Love, when you love somebody, that person is forever part of you, and will live forever because it transcends space and time. And obviously, what we'd like to have is to have both together, to have the person you love in a physical form, so you can connect to them right here, right now. That obviously is what we'd like. But the love doesn't go away just because the physical is no longer there. But we live in a world that worships the temporary, the transient, and does not value necessarily the eternal. But inside of us resonates a voice that always looks for that eternal. And unfortunately, it's not fanned enough in our lives. It's not reinforced. You turn on the television, you read a magazine, you look at advertising. They're all focusing on selling you things that are here and now, and reinforcing the message that your value is based on your beauty, on your looks, on your youth, on whatever you are doing at this given moment. You drive this type of car, you wear this type of clothing, you travel to this type of place. So I'm not dismissing any of the beauties of this world. There's great beauty to the world. But as soon as it gets divorced and is no longer seamless with that which is beyond, all problems begin from there. And who suffers most? Your relationships. Because the rest of us, we can maneuver and be compartmentalized. But a relationship cannot tolerate compartmentalization. And just to give you an example, I am always, now I have a granddaughter. She's almost 2 years old. So they just came here to California because my son is getting married next week, so in Pittsburgh. So they're here. So I observe her beside being my granddaughter, but I'm absolutely taken by children, and all children, because children are us. That's what we looked like before we became tarnished. So it's good to see yourself what you look like before. It's like freshly fallen snow. There's a beauty to it before everybody starts trampling on it. So I see children, you see freshly fallen snow. And the lessons you learn from it are tremendous. Because everything about them that's natural, you see how far we've wandered. For example, you talk about seamlessness, adventure. A child, every little detail in life is sacred. There's nothing that's not exciting. Every time my granddaughter, this is for every child, this is not, I'm just saying because I see it on a daily basis. Everything is an adventure. Little things that you'd think, why is a child naturally that way? Because a child hasn't yet been, as I said, jaded by a compartmentalized world. A child is seamless. A child doesn't know about that you can lie, say one thing and do another. A child has to be taught by adults that you lie. Disappointed. A child is seamless. You ask a child, what did you do? They're going to tell you. When's the first time they lie? When they learn from an adult how to lie. And I can go on and on. All these virtues that I'm describing here. A child, for example, child sexuality. So a child, of course, thank God, does not experience sexuality, but everything is pure about them. They're not conscious of their nudity. Why should they be? Just like Adam and Eve before they ate from the tree. Because if you live in a pure, seamless world, intimacy. What's there to be ashamed of intimacy? Now, why Rebecca covers herself and why, as we go older, we cover, because the fact is we don't live in an intimate world. We live in a very coarse world. So intimacy has to be protected. Like the Holy of Holies, it has to be a sacred thing, has to be cared for. Similar to why when a person goes to surgery, the room has to be completely sterilized, because when you open the internal organs, it's very open, it's very vulnerable to infection. As soon as you enter a more vulnerable place psychologically in a person, a lot of damage can be done. Children have that type of vulnerability, which is why child abuse is one of the worst, most severe forms of abuse, because you're tampering not with a person that has any defenses. You're going to a person who's purity. It's violating a state of purity, which just tells you how horrendous it is. And how is it even possible that an adult can abuse a child? To me, when I first heard of the concept, I couldn't believe it. And a parent, let alone a parent, it doesn't make any sense. So you have to say the person the person who's doing the abuse is so I want to use the word, is so messed up, they can't even see it. That's not a defense. That's a critique, obviously. That's how far they've wandered. Because if you think about it, how would somebody, you want to do something, but how could you violate purity? Purity is especially defenseless. Just to show you the extent of how messed up this world can be. We don't appreciate children. You talk about consequences in life. I was talking once to a sociologist, a very interesting guy, and I said to him, so how do you measure, what's the criteria for a healthy society versus an unhealthy one? She started giving me all kinds of statistics about economic growth and GDP and all these different things about basically that our society is, of course, the most advanced of all, because based on our standard of living, etc., etc. So I said, well, just for the record, let me tell you, the Torah's answer is quite different than yours. He asked me, what is it? One thing and one thing only: the welfare of our children. It's the only criteria of a healthy society. How healthy are they? Are they appreciated? Are they the center of the universe? Or are they just adults in the waiting? And like that story, the mother sent her child to daycare, and one of the teachers sensed that the child is needs a little more love and kisses and hugs and validation. So the teacher decided, she's going to have a heart-to-heart talk with the mother, without criticizing her, but woman to woman, she'll try to convey that at home they should give this child a lot more attention. You seem very starved for attention. So she sits down with the mother, and to her surprise, the mother's completely open to hearing. Yeah, I'd love to hear. Tell me what you think. She says, this child needs a lot more loving and kissing and hugging, and you need to give more attention and so on. She says, something? His psychologist said the same thing. And I've been telling our maid, Laura, to hug him more. She simply doesn't get it. That was the end sentence. She simply doesn't get it. So you hear a story like that, and it's like you think, okay, if she's so busy building a career, so she hired somebody for this, of course, and she's telling this hired person to give the child more love. Now, that's a whole other discussion. I'm not here, fire and brimstone, to attack careers and stuff. We live in a world that has many, many beautiful blessings. But whether our priorities exactly are in order, it's another story. And the fact is, it is like a snowball effect. The more you indulge in yourself, the more you will continue to indulge, until you stop, till the what do you call it? You stem the flow, or you flow the stem. Which one is it? Yeah, I know it didn't sound good. Flow the stem. I just thought I would try that out. It's an example of a topsy-turvy world, right? So what we learn from this one verse in Chayei, think about it, is the secret to an enduring relationship. You could imagine that if Isaac saw this in Rebekah, and Rebekah saw this in Isaac, and they joined forces, what kind of home they built? This was their priority. Their priority was to create a life that's like a flame, and to be one that every part of the universe is sacred, everything you touch. And finally, that everything is body and soul, intimacy, knowledge. It's about an aura, a pure aura. Now, if you think that this is a fantasy and not achievable, it's not correct. I have met people like this in our time and day and age. They don't usually get awarded, and they're not going to advertise themselves, but there are people like this, unsung heroes, that build homes of this nature. And if you want a real example, if any of you think that I'm just exaggerating, I'll invite you for a Shabbos to a home like this. Seriously, I'll set you up in a home that is like of this nature, and you tell me afterwards whether I was right or wrong. Is it a perfect home? There's no such thing as perfection in this world, but very similar to these type of standards. Unfortunately, we are not exposed enough to them. And if they start already making a show on television about it, which of course has commercial value, you can imagine it's not exactly going to be reflective of the story, the way it is. Now, the question, of course, is how do we draw a line from where we are to a place like this? Well, it all begins with small moves. It all begins with things we can do on a small level. It's difficult to just transform a whole perspective, and definitely our job is not to transform society. But you have to begin to think independently. You're not a product of anyone except of your own choices. And when you start realizing that you do not have to do just certain things just because everyone else is doing it, you're already beginning somewhere. In our own lives, each of us, I'm specifically have to speak in general terms because different people in this room here or online in different places. Some of us have a soulmate, and maybe we need to learn to appreciate that soulmate in a new way. Discover how your spouse is your soulmate, to put it that way. Others are searching for their soulmate. Others are in terrible relationships and trying to get out. And others are so clueless that they think everything is fine until, God forbid, something you hit rock bottom. So everybody's in a different type of place. I just used a few examples. You could fit yourself in anywhere in the spectrum as you like. So it's hard to really give advice beyond what I've said here, because to apply these ideas to each of our lives is case by case. Each of us is in a different situation. But I think that the principles that I stated here are specific enough that if you start thinking, okay, so where do I stand in this regard, it'll give you plenty of food for thought. Not just food for thought, and what you're looking for, what's a priority, what's not a priority. And you'll see the greatest challenge will be your comfort zone, your status quo. Don't ever underestimate the inertia of your routines. They're unbelievably powerful. They're so powerful that they deceive you into thinking, oh yeah, big thing, I was inspired tonight, oh, I heard a great idea, I'm going to implement it. Try it out. Try to act on something you get inspired by and tell me how long it lasts. And it doesn't last, it doesn't dissipate because you weren't inspired, it dissipates because your routines take over. So the status quo of a certain situation is extremely powerful, and it's silent because it keeps you it's like gravitating back to that same equilibrium, the same center point, for good or for bad. So the challenge here is identifying what you want to have in a relationship, but the second thing is to realize that your present perspectives and your standards and your routines and the things you got accustomed to are your enemy, because they're going to keep you trapped and not let you move toward any type of to any other higher standard, because they've grown on you and they've become second nature. I'm just pointing out some of the obstacles in the way. But if you're a person who's persistent and you want to find, let's put it this way, you answer this question in a positive way, that I'd rather be uncomfortable but find the truth, or would you rather be comfortable and live a lie, or would you rather be comfortable and be mediocre, then obviously you're not going to get too far. So with integrity and with a commitment and having some type of sense of goal and objective, there's no question each of us can make it. And the critical element to this is as well is to have someone you can talk to about it. Because it's very difficult to do it alone, which is why we need relationship in the first place. But then we're back to the catch-22 thing. So it's about finding someone you can trust, someone that you can relate to, because they can help you sometimes get out of your own pit, you know, and be able to see it from a perspective that's beyond your own myopic view. So, in one sentence, in one verse, all this is carried, as I said, based on the Rashi, the three things: the flame, the blessing, and the aura, or the flame, the blessing, and the cloud. Now, keep that in mind, and you'll see that it can change the way you search for things. And this is one example of many that as I began the class earlier, about relevance. If we were able to read the Torah in this fashion and find within these verses and its stories relevance that addresses the contemporary struggles of our lives, obviously our whole relationship with Torah would be different. But more importantly, your whole life would be different, because here we have a time-tested book that has worked. You know, that has worked. They passed on Isaac and Rebekah passed something on to their children. And Jacob passed it on to his children. And all of us have it inside of us, generation after generation. And as I said earlier, it endured everything, all the challenges. So it's a formula. And that formula has a lot of power to it. So I touched upon some of the elements. I hope that, as they say, you give little to a wise person, and the wise person does a lot more with it. So hopefully your wisdom and your ingenuity and search and restlessness will help give birth to many other ideas that grow out of this central one. And as always, it's a great honor for me to be part of your journey, and I hope you feel the same, because we're all chapters of a big book, called The Drama of Life, the story of history. Each of us is an indispensable component, and the story can be told completely without each of our lives fulfilling its purpose. So if you think, if you need a little guilt, if you don't actualize your potential and find what you need to find in life, it affects the rest of us too, just in case you're wondering, okay? So, because we're all in it together. But it's also a great gift and blessing to know that we all need each other, and at the same time we all have something indispensable to contribute. And hopefully I can serve as a friend to you in this regard, and hopefully vice versa as well. It's a partnership, so please see myself and our team, Meaningful Life Center. You know, our website is, I think, a very good resource of a lot of materials. And if you don't get our weekly emails, please leave your email up front here with us. And in any other way we can be of help to you, in any particular way, please do not be bashful, and feel free to call upon us, myself or anyone that I work with. And with that being said, I will say that this class is dedicated in the dedicated loving memory of Sarah Golda Bat Zev Wolf. The yahrzeit is 19th of Cheshvan, which is right now, by the grandmother of our good friend Mark, and also Rebbe Rashab's birthday, which is on the 20th of Cheshvan, 150th anniversary of that birthday. And I will also add that if anybody wants to sponsor a class in honor of a loved one, memory of someone's a great opportunity to link a person's soul with the merit of teaching Torah to so many. And finally, I want to say that Philip's class, I mentioned Philip there. Philip, take a bow. Will be tomorrow at 7 p.m. From inspiration to positive action, moving ahead. And I encourage anyone that can make it tomorrow night here, Thursday, at 7 p.m. And I will be here next Wednesday. I'll keep you posted because of my son's wedding. I'm not sure yet what the schedule is, but if you don't get the weekly, we send every Wednesday morning, we send out a weekly update about the class, the topic, and if there's any changes in schedule or someone else will give the class. So keep your eyes open. And but as I said, I believe in keeping things steady, So we definitely won't break. Maybe someone will fill in for me. I'm not sure yet. I have to work that out. And as, what can I say? We take a little break from one leg of this journey to the next leg of the journey. And it's always a pleasure, honor to sit with you. Thank you so much.